I also know who killed Sonny Liston.
And Sonny Liston, I watched him here in the gym a few months ago, and he can hit a guy in the elbows and just about break his arm.
Oh, Sonny Liston, no doubt the scariest human being I've met in the ring.
If he would come to me, I'd kill him.
On January 5th, 1971, Geraldine Liston returned to her Las Vegas home after spending the Christmas holiday with her mother in St. Louis. She had been trying to reach her husband by phone for 12 days and getting nothing back, not a word. When she unlocked the front door, she found newspapers stacked up on the step outside, piles of them. Days of mail that had never been collected. Inside, the milk in the kitchen had gone rotten. The house was dark and completely silent. In the master bedroom, she found the former heavyweight champion of the world dead in his bed. He had been lying there, decomposing, for approximately 6 days. The police came. They found 3 small bags of heroin on the kitchen counter, a syringe near the body, a glass of vodka, a bag of marijuana in his pocket. The Clark County coroner eventually ruled the cause of death as lung congestion and heart failure, attributing it to natural causes. No homicide investigation was opened. No one was charged. No one was ever brought in for questioning. That was the official end of Sonny Liston, except nothing about it added up. And the people who knew him best, the trainers, the cornermen, the fighters, the Las Vegas insiders who watched him in his final years, have spent more than 50 years saying the same thing out loud. Sonny Liston did not die of natural causes. Sonny Liston was murdered. And the reason he was murdered can be traced back through every chapter of his life, because his life and his death were always part of the same story.
I also know who killed Sonny Liston.
A story that began in the cotton fields of Arkansas and ended in a mob-controlled desert city where inconvenient men had a way of disappearing quietly. The boy from Sandslow. Charles Liston was born sometime around 1930. The exact date is uncertain because no birth certificate exists, a fact that speaks volumes about the world he entered. His father, Toby, was an abusive sharecropper in St. Francis County, Arkansas. His mother, Helen, had already had children before their marriage, and together they produced what most accounts estimate as somewhere between 24 and 25 children in total. Charles was born toward the end of that long and brutal line. He grew up picking cotton, being beaten by his father, getting no schooling whatsoever. He could not read or write for most of his adult life. He was a massive, powerful child in a world that offered him exactly nothing. He left for St. Louis as a teenager, following his mother who had already fled. In St. Louis, he did what enormous, uneducated, desperate young men with nothing do in cities that offer them nothing. He committed crimes, armed robbery, muggings. He was arrested more than 20 times before he was 20 years old. In 1950, he was convicted of first-degree robbery and sentenced to 5 years in the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City. Prison is where Sonny Liston became a boxer. A Catholic chaplain named Father Alois Stevens noticed him and saw what everyone who ever saw Liston noticed immediately. A physical specimen so extraordinary that it almost defied description. 6 feet 1 inch tall, fists that measured 15 inches around, arms that hung to his thighs. Stevens introduced him to the prison boxing program, and within months, Liston was the most feared fighter behind those walls. He was paroled in 1952 and turned professional the following year, knocking out Don Smith in the first round of his debut in St. Louis on September 2, 1953. But freedom did not mean independence. Not for Sonny Liston. Because from the very beginning of his professional career, the men who owned boxing in America had already claimed him. The mob that owned him. In the post-war years, professional boxing in the United States was not governed by athletic commissions or promoters in the conventional sense. It was governed by organized crime. The central figure was a Lucchese family soldier named Frankie Carbo, known throughout the sport as the Czar of Boxing, who along with his Philadelphia partner Frank Blinky Palermo operated what amounted to a criminal monopoly over the heavyweight and middleweight divisions. They owned fighters through frontmen. They fixed fights through intimidation and bribery. They skimmed purses. They dictated who fought whom and when and under what circumstances. Bud Schulberg, the screenwriter behind On the Waterfront and a longtime boxing journalist, described the arrangement directly. Frankie Carbo, the mob's unofficial commissioner for boxing, controlled a lot of the welters and middles. Not every fight was fixed, of course, but from time to time Carbo and his lieutenants would put the fix in. Sonny Liston's first professional contract was signed with a frontman named Pep Barone, but the real owner was St. Louis mob figure John Vitale. By 1959, Carbo and Palermo had acquired a majority interest in Liston's contract, adding him to a stable of fighters that included lightweight champion Ike Williams, welterweight champion Johnny Saxton, and Billy Fox. whose 1947 dive against Jake LaMotta remains one of the most notorious fixed fights in history. Liston knew exactly who he worked for. He had always known. In the years before his shot at the heavyweight title, he served the mob not just as a fighter, but as a physical presence, an enforcer, a debt collector, a man whose very existence in a room communicated a threat that no words were needed to complete. He was photographed with the Cray twins during a visit to London. He was connected to mob figures in St. Louis, Philadelphia, and New York simultaneously. He did 14 arrests between 1953 and 1958, and a workhouse stint for assaulting a police officer and stealing his gun. The boxing establishment did not want him near the heavyweight title. Floyd Patterson's manager, Gus D'Amato, refused to give him a fight for years. President Kennedy himself reportedly contacted Patterson's camp and asked them not to let Liston fight for the championship, citing his mob connections as a national embarrassment. Floyd Patterson eventually agreed, probably because there was no one else on earth who deserved the shot more. And on September 25, 1962, in Chicago, Sonny Liston knocked out Floyd Patterson in 2 minutes and 6 seconds of the first round to become heavyweight champion of the world. In their rematch the following year, he did it again, 4 seconds faster. Back-to-back first-round knockouts of the reigning champion. Nobody had ever done that before. At his peak, Sonny Liston was one of the most physically terrifying human beings who ever laced up a pair of gloves. His left jab hit with the force of most men's power shots. His right hand ended careers. He destroyed opponents with a methodical, suffocating efficiency that made his fights seem inevitable from the opening bell. The great trainer and historian Manny Stewart said he had never seen anything like it before or after. The total dominance of a fully realized heavyweight in his prime. Muhammad Ali, who would later say almost no one else could have beaten him, told reporters that Liston could have knocked out every heavyweight who ever lived, except possibly himself, and that even that would not be certain. The two fights that ended everything. On February 25, 1964, Sonny Liston defended his title against a 22-year-old loudmouth from Louisville, Kentucky, named Cassius Clay. Every sports writer of consequence gave Liston the fight. He was an 8-1 favorite. His demolitions of Patterson were fresh in everyone's memory. The smart money and the Vegas odds and 43 of the 46 journalists covering the bout picked Liston to stop Clay inside 3 rounds. He never got started. Clay, faster, younger, sharper, and infinitely more prepared, tied Liston in knots for 6 rounds. In the 4th round, Clay briefly went partially blind when a substance from Liston's gloves got into his eyes. Whether deliberate sabotage or incidental contact remains disputed. He nearly quit. His cornerman talked him back out. When the bell rang for the 7th round, Liston did not get off his stool. He quit. He claimed a torn rotator cuff in his left shoulder. Some believed it, many did not. The rematch, held in Lewiston, Maine, in May 1965, became one of the most controversial finishes in the history of sports. 1 minute and 44 seconds into the first round, Ali threw a short right hand. Liston went down. He rolled onto his back. He lay there while the referee Jersey Joe Walcott, completely overwhelmed by the chaos in the ring, failed to administer a count. The crowd of barely 4,000 people immediately screamed, "Fix!" Liston eventually got to his feet and attempted to resume fighting, at which point Walcott was informed by the timekeeper that more than 10 seconds had elapsed and the fight was over. Ali was declared the winner. The photograph taken at that moment, Ali standing over, Liston with his arm extended, screaming at him to get up, became one of the most iconic images in American sports history. What actually happened in those 90 seconds has never been definitively resolved. Liston biographer Nick Tosches described the way his body went down as the halting, unnatural, awkward choreography of a man who is performing a fall rather than the sundering spontaneity of a man knocked down unawares. Others at ringside believed the punch connected perfectly and that the resulting knockout was legitimate. Boxing historian Nigel Collins reported in his book, Boxing Babylon, that during the training camp before the rematch, 2 men visited Liston and delivered a simple message. If Liston won the fight and regained the title, there would be a bullet waiting for him. Some believed Liston stayed down, not because he was hurt, but because he was afraid. That the options available to him that night in Maine were get up and possibly die, or stay down and live a little longer. Neither fight paid him what he was owed. He had still not been fully paid for the first Clay fight when he died. The mob that owned his contract for all those years had seen to that. The Las Vegas years and the last chapter. After Lewiston, Sonny Liston was finished as a legitimate heavyweight contender. He was 33 years old, or possibly older. His birth date was never confirmed, and some believed he was already in his late 30s by the time he won the title. He moved to Las Vegas in 1966 and began rebuilding a record against a series of journeyman opponents. He won 14 straight fights in the late 1960s. He was genuinely trying, to work his way back to relevance. But Las Vegas in 1970 was not a place where a man with Sonny Liston's history could move through the world safely. The city was still entirely controlled by organized crime. The Skin, the daily skim of cash from casino profits before it was ever officially counted, was running at millions of dollars per operation per day. The FBI and DEA were circling. Every decision made by the Las Vegas underworld was calibrated around one objective: keeping the money flowing and keeping the law out. Liston's handler in these years was a man named Irving Ash Resnick, a notorious Las Vegas gambler and fixer who reported up through the mob hierarchy to Mo Deleets, the godfather of Las Vegas, a man who had been laundering money with Meyer Lansky for nearly 50 years and who despised Liston personally and openly. The contempt went both ways. Liston's relationship with Resnick had soured considerably by late 1970. Here is where the specific theories about his death converge. Investigative journalist Sean Asael, who spent years researching the case for his book, The Murder of Sonny Liston, identified several likely triggers. One was that Liston had begun selling heroin to black street dealers in West Las Vegas and occasionally inside strip casinos, a direct violation of the mob's most absolute rule. The mob ran Las Vegas. Narcotics dealers operating in mob territory without permission invited police attention, which invited scrutiny of the casinos, which threatened the Skim. It was not tolerated. When Resnick found out, he told Liston to stop immediately. The two men were no longer speaking by the time Liston died. Another theory centers on the Chuck Wepner fight. On June 29, 1970, in Jersey City, Liston fought the Bayonne Bleeder, a durable if limited heavyweight who was being heavily backed by certain gamblers on the expectation that he would win. Liston beat Wepner so thoroughly and so brutally that the fight was stopped when Wepner could no longer continue. He needed 54 stitches in his face. Liston's trainer Johnny Talco has said that two men met with Liston in the days before the fight, men connected to the money that was riding on Wepner. 6 months later, Liston was dead. His body had been decomposing for approximately 6 days when it was found. The Clark County coroner ruled natural causes. No investigation was conducted as a homicide. What the coroner found at the scene included a syringe, 3 bags of heroin in the kitchen, and needle marks on Liston's right arm. What virtually every person who knew Sonny Liston well has consistently said for 50 years is this: Sonny Liston was terrified of needles to a degree that bordered on phobia. His trainer Willie Reddish once recalled that Liston canceled a planned trip to Africa because he did not want to receive the required inoculation injections. His dentist and close friend Davy Pearl confirmed the same thing. Father Edward Murphy, who knew him personally, confirmed it. Reddish said plainly he was not depressed, he was not prone to suicide. I think Mr. Liston was killed. The coroner's own toxicology report undermined the overdose theory further. Only small trace amounts of heroin metabolites, morphine and codeine, were found in the kidney tissue. The level of drugs found did not indicate an overdose-type death. Someone with a genuine tolerance for heroin would need far more to die of it. Someone without a tolerance, someone for whom the drug was administered by another person, forcibly, might not need much at all. In 1982, a Las Vegas police informant named Erwin Peters came forward with a specific claim. He alleged that Liston had been murdered by a former Las Vegas police officer named Larry Gandy, hired by Ash Resnick to administer what is known in underworld circles as a hot shot, a lethal injection of heroin forced into the bloodstream of someone not expecting it. Peters said the fallout between Liston and Resnick over money had reached a point of no return. Investigators questioned Gandy. He denied everything. No physical evidence sufficient for charges was ever found. 5 years later, in 1987, Erwin Peters was found dead in his garage with the car engine still running. His death was ruled an accident. Journalist Sean Asael, after interviewing dozens of people connected to Liston's final years, reached his own conclusion. Among the vast universe of people I talked to, nobody doubted that Sonny was killed. It was just a matter of who they were pointing the fingers at. The coroner who ruled natural causes, Asael concluded, had likely been instructed by those same forces that ran Las Vegas, through Resnick, through Deleets, to close the case and close it quietly. The man they never gave a chance. Sonny Liston was many things. He was violent and he was connected to violent men. He lived in the world available to him, a world shaped by the Arkansas cotton fields, the Missouri penitentiary, and the organized crime apparatus that saw in his fists a commodity to be exploited until there was nothing left to take. But he was also something that boxing never properly acknowledged. Former champion Jose Torres, one of the great champions in the sport's history, once said he had never encountered any athlete, basketball player, baseball player, football player, more intelligent than Sonny Liston. His former wife Geraldine described him to Jet magazine in 1963 as a good and gentle man at home. His doctor described a human being who was, for all his imposing physical presence, genuinely afraid of needles. A man who bore the weight of a nickname, the Big Bear, that reduced him to something primal and dangerous when the reality of him was considerably more complicated. At a time when the civil rights movement was reshaping American public life, Sonny Liston was the wrong kind of black man for the moment. The NAACP didn't want him as a champion. The press described him with language that would be unprintable today. He was cast as the villain in a narrative that needed one, the beast for Floyd Patterson's beauty, the menace for Clay's charisma. He played the role because it was the only role available. But underneath the scowl and the silence and the 15-inch fists, there was a man who had been given nothing and still managed to build something, only to have it taken by the same forces that had been taking from him since he was a child in Arkansas. Nobody has ever been charged in the death of Charles Sonny Liston. The case is officially closed. The mob that ran Las Vegas in 1970 is gone in its old form. The men who ordered and carried out whatever happened in that house scattered into history and into graves of their own. Irwin Peters, the one man who came forward with a specific name, died in a garage with the engine running. Larry Gandy denied everything and is gone. Ash Resnick is gone. Mo Dalitz is gone. All that remains is the question. And 54 years later, the answer everyone closest to Sonny Liston has always given is the same. He was murdered. And the men who did it were never held accountable for it. Just like everything else in Sonny Liston's life, the purses that were stolen, the title that was manipulated, the fights that the mob decided before he ever stepped into the ring, what happened to him happened in the dark, and the people responsible made sure it stayed there.